that, we can officially start. Welcome, everyone. My name is Ross Pally, General Manager at Venture Lane. We are a hub and support system for early stage technology companies in the greater Boston area. Very excited today to have Olivia Lew of General Catalyst and Gaurav Tuli of F Prime Capital with us. Welcome, Olivia. Welcome, Gaurav. And we'll turn it over to them in just a moment for some backstories. But before we do, topic for today, passing investor due diligence without meeting in person. We've been having 2 or 3 webinars a week for the past 60 days or so as part of our virtual crisis programming for founders. And a theme that's come up several times on some of our investor related webinars and even on some of the non-investor related webinars, it still comes up, is this difficulty of not being able to meet your prospective investors, or on the other side of the fence, your prospective founders in person before closing a new deal. So very interested to hear from Olivia and Gaurav today, what the process has been like from their respective organizations and what advice they have for founders who might be facing this non-in-person due diligence process. But before we kick it over to them, quick rules of the road. If you've just tuned in, please submit your answers to the audience poll because we will be using that information to inform a lot of the conversation today. And if you have questions for Olivia or Gaurav at any point, if you hover over the bottom button on your toolbar, there's a Q&A. Just hit the Q&A button, type in your questions, and we will raise those with Olivia and Gaurav. So enough from me. We'll hear a little bit more from me later on, but over to Olivia and then to Gaurav. Would love to hear quickly what you're doing at General Catalyst, maybe a quick couple of words about prior professional experiences before General Catalyst, and then status quo at General Catalyst right now. What's been going on in the last 60 days for the team?
Great. Thank you. And thank you for hosting. Thank you everyone for joining. I'm excited to hear your questions and how your experience has been through this time as well. So I hope we can open up the conversation as well. So I am an investor on the early stage team at General Catalyst. I have been on the early stage team for about 3.5 years. I'm based here in our Boston, Cambridge office, and I focus primarily on the intersection of software and healthcare. So an example of one of my deals here in Boston is PathAI, which uses machine learning to more accurately read pathology biopsy images. And let's see, so General Catalyst, over the last 60 days, we've been, the first period of this strange time, we really focused on the portfolio and making sure that everybody had a plan in place to survive. We called it survival, and make sure you could make your cash last as long as possible, and that everyone was in a good place to manage the uncertainty of what has unfolded. And then also we were very lucky and fortunate to have been on the tail end of closing our latest fund. And so we feel extremely fortunate to have closed that fund and now are taking or have been taking meetings with founders and are back on track to do investing. So, and I'll say just for context of this conversation, we have not closed a Series A or B deal on the early stage team since COVID, a new deal since COVID. What we have closed several seed deals. So I can speak to, but we have done diligence, and I will be speaking to that.
Great. And maybe we'll just add one more question. What's been your favorite thing about working from home over the last
family. I have a 2-year-old, so not wasting the time on commute and being able to pop in and say hi throughout the day has really been great.
Very good. Wonderful. Gaurav, would you like to introduce yourself and give us sort of the current state of affairs over at F Prime?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Gaurav. Ross, thank you for having us. You guys Venture Lane's been a great partner to F Prime since we've known you guys, so very much appreciate that. My name is Gaurav. I'm a partner at F Prime. I've been here for about 10 years. My office is in Cambridge, although we're a global fund, so teams around the world and large presence out in SF, but also in Europe, India, China, Japan, the UK. So you may know us more by some of the deals we've been in. Companies like Kensho, which we were in with General Catalyst, and Toast, Flywire. So a lot of great Boston-based companies. We are backed by Fidelity Investments and manage about $6.5 billion. My focus area is primarily like enterprise investing, so B2B, tech, done some consumer and other areas in the past, but I spend for the last 5 years has been focused on enterprise tech, security, infrastructure, vertical applications, areas like that. We're stage agnostic, so go early, we go late. This time has been really interesting for us, and it was great to hear some familiar sounds from Olivia as well, because I think funds, we've all been kind of going through a similar process, which was, I think, the first 3 weeks were probably the steepest learning curve in my career, partly because many of us, at least as younger investors, we started our venture careers post the last or during the last recession, so it's been a general upswing since then. Mm-hmm. So our team was all hands on deck, working really closely with our portfolio companies. We're generally active investors like GC, so we're on the boards of most of our investments, and the same strategies. Like, let's make sure we've got a good business that can weather the storm, and we've got enough capital to get through it, and we're making the right decisions to set us up for long-term success. And that required some tough decisions and some not so tough decisions. But I generally feel, especially in the Boston community, where I think companies have tended to focus on building healthy businesses, I feel really strongly about our portfolio, as well as a lot of what we're seeing now. And so, we've been pretty active, especially over the last month or so. On the healthcare side, we've done a number of new investments, both seed and Series A. On the tech side, we're doing our first post-COVID, never met you in person, seed investment now. So, but I think I think Olivia is saying the same thing. I think the mindset has kind of shifted from the internally focused to, we've got a lot of dry powder. We're seeing a lot of amazing opportunities, and there are many companies that are benefiting from disruption in the market, right? Whenever there's kind of a, and this is a really unfortunate one, but whenever there is a kind of cataclysmic disruption, the startup community is able to figure out amazing ways of finding inflection from that, and so we're seeing a lot of really interesting companies emerge that are doing some exciting things.
Of course, and history has certainly showed us that in prior downturns.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, before we dig into some of the results of this poll, let's get high-level thoughts from you both. Olivia, to start. Due diligence process over the last 60 days or so, largely the same for General Catalyst. Any major changes? Obviously, the inability to meet in person and have those partner meetings directly with the founders or more members of the team is probably the biggest challenge. But has it felt largely the same for General Catalyst, or does it feel like quite a different reality right now than it's been prior to COVID?
Both, depending on different aspects of due diligence. And I where I would start, or my thought process or framework of thinking about this starts at just, the basis of our industry actually is built on trust, and trust between your partners in your partnership, or trust between an investor and an entrepreneur, both ways, or trust even between the entrepreneur and their team. And I think that's so important when we're on this journey of building a company together. It's extra important. And that part of building trust is, I think, what we can go into today in particular, because that part changes tremendously, right? Trust is built on building a relationship, and building a relationship is much more challenging to do from scratch over Zoom, in my opinion. But so that does change. The other pieces of diligence, customer calls, maybe founder references, tech diligence, those pieces to me, and I look forward to hearing what Gaurav thinks on your end, but they're still the same in that we still need to do them. We need to do them well. Because of the first piece changing, I do think the bar becomes a little bit higher, because there might be a little bit more uncertainty on the understanding the culture of the team, that trust. So maybe that translates into a little bit of a higher bar on the other end, but in terms of the framework of diligence, hasn't changed on our end.
Got it. Makes sense. So without the ability to meet in person, which is one of the greatest ways to build trust between investor and founder, maybe a little bit of a rising tide in terms of the other due diligence processes, just to bring the whole level of trust up overall, it sounds like. Okay, Gaurav, any additional thoughts? Feeling much of the same over at F Prime?
Yeah, I think Olivia said it very well. Like I think a lot of it is, frankly, is the same. That the bar point is the key one, which is, there's we're probably spending a little bit more time on due diligence than we would have in, you meet a founder, you've got 24 hours to make a decision or 3 days to make a decision. I think Zoom has slowed things down a bit, and also the general fundraising climate has slowed things down a little bit, and that has a lot of implications. And one of them has been that it takes a little bit longer, the bar is a little bit higher, but deals are certainly still getting done, which I think is, and there are many funds, including the two of ours that are remaining very active through this period because the capital is available. But the biggest challenge is, and it's a two-way street. It is this trust element, and how do you get to know somebody in the ways that a lot of VCs historically have gotten to know people over meals and drinks and coming in and spending whiteboarding sessions with your partnership, and those things are really, really difficult to replicate on Zoom. But that doesn't mean that you still can't build trust. You just have to do it in other ways. And if you can think, if people can get married over, internet dating, and they never meet each other until they get to the altar. And my parents had an arranged marriage and never met each other until the day they got married. Like, I think it's possible that we can build trust. We can build trust over Zoom. So I do see it as a great mechanism. It's just going to be different.
Got it. And it looks like we already have a question from the audience. Let's answer this one quickly, and then we'll dig into the survey results. Question from the audience is, we are nearing our first meeting date for pitching for our seed opportunity. Our pre-pandemic plan was rational and took into account the challenge of hiring. Would you fund additional hiring in this time if the founder has experience building larger teams faster? What is your advice on approaching this pitch? So the rest of this conversation will be more around the due diligence process. One question from the audience here specifically around incorporating maybe like a narrative into the pitch.
Yeah, Olivia, I can tackle it.
Go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, I actually do think this ties into the due diligence point as well. So I would say that the macro question, Eric, I think you're posing is around, how do you share plans, and how do you talk about plans, and how do you talk about the impact of COVID on your business and what you want to do about that? But fundamentally, we're in the business of backing high growth companies that can generate really large outcomes in the future. We want our companies hiring, right? That is a really critical component of growth, and we're investors in Toast, and Toast had to unfortunately let go of a large number of amazing people. But that's a great time for businesses like yours, Eric, where you're going to find phenomenal talent out there. So it is not a blanket answer to say that every company should be on a hiring freeze right now. That is most certainly not the answer. If you see a business opportunity that is compelling enough, you should be hiring people. And we would certainly, as we're thinking about investing in companies, we would be looking for companies that aren't necessarily frozen right now, that are actually actively looking to grow.
Yep, makes sense.
Yeah, what I would add to that is, your ability to sell the investor over Zoom is part of what we're thinking is, can this person also hire over Zoom in the current climate? And so I think that, just think about how do you answer that question? And I think, for us, it's always helpful to know that you have already identified those people. If you did have money, who would you hire? And you have your list of candidates that you would be psyched to bring on if you had a little bit of extra cash. That's always a good tip, I think.
Got it. All right. So a little bit of a primer on how to incorporate the hiring narrative into your fundraising pitch. Now we'll make the switch over to the poll. One small snafu that we realized with the poll, we asked attendees for their top 3 strategies, but we only gave them the option to choose one. It's okay. If nothing else, this actually makes the results a bit more clear as to what the true winners are. And interestingly enough, it looks like the most clicked on strategy here is one that Olivia recommended that we sort of add at the 11th hour, and that is offering investors to meet additional members of the team to get a better sense of the culture. So Olivia, I assume this is a strategy that maybe General Catalyst has been implementing in the last 60 days or so. Would you care to expand on how that has been, how that process has unfolded for General Catalyst?
Yeah, for sure. It goes back to the idea of building a relationship with a founder and understanding the culture of the organization, because culture fit, and this goes both ways, not just for investors to understand the culture of the founder and the organization, the startup, but also the startup to understand the investor's culture and style. And I think without getting the same depth in a Zoom conversation, you can meet other team members to start to build that a more complete picture. That's what we have used in art.
Sure. And Gaurav, has F Prime done anything similar, meeting more members of the team right now because you just simply can't meet the founders in person?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it was always part of the process. I think, as Olivia is saying, it was always part, right? And we just want to make sure now the serendipity that comes from being able to walk around someone's office and going on site and visiting, like, we're trying to replicate that in the best way we can. And so I think this is exactly what is happening, and it's just a little more formal than it used to be. That's exactly what's happening.
So a question for you both: as you're having those calls with different members of the team, what are some of the signals that you're sort of looking for in terms of being able to distinguish, is there a positive, high achieving, passionate, collaborative culture within this team or not? Is it certain keywords that you're looking for? Is it how team members talk about and reference each other? What are some of the sort of the signals that you're trying to pull out of those conversations?
For me, it's the consistency of message and vision, and it's the fact that the second layer of management and the third layer and the fourth layer, if that's how teams are structured, but that everyone on the team is living and breathing the vision, understands it, understands the future, and is as equally passionate and excited about it, regardless of what their role is in the company. And I think that's what we tend to look for. And then, that's at a high level. And the second level is around, again, back to what we were saying before, what are the reasons we meet? You want to meet lots of people on the team, not just the founders all the time. And it's because you want to make sure that the depth of expertise is also there in their respective, with their respective responsibilities. So you meet someone in marketing, you want to hear that they can bring in a game to marketing and sales and every responsibility someone in an organization has. But the first is really just, are we all living and breathing the same messages here?
Great. Got it.
Yeah, I would echo that. That's a great answer, and that's exactly what we're looking for. Is there does that passion follow across the team?
So on the one hand, making sure that vision, mission, values, that's consistent across the whole team, everyone's rowing the boat in the same direction. And on the other hand, making sure that the subject matter expertise is there where it needs to be on the different departments. Great. Okay. Well, that was by and large the most popular strategy that we had in the poll. Going down from there, next most popular, offering more customer reference calls. Olivia, Gaurav, is this something that you've experienced with prospective investments in the past 60 days or so, an increase in the number of customer reference calls, or has this been rather consistent with kind of pre-crisis processes?
For us, that hasn't really changed. It was a very important piece of diligence pre-crisis, and it still is. What might change is that startups may be a little more sensitive around bothering, because I particularly look in the healthcare sector where hospitals, for example, contacting a hospital client is a little tricky during this time. But otherwise, for us, it has not changed much on this front.
Got it. Gaurav, any change over at F-Prime?
Not that we've seen on that. We do the same kind of on-list and off-list customer references we always do, and but yeah, not much changed otherwise.
Got it. So no real change in terms of number of calls. Any change in what you would expect to hear on some of those customer reference calls? Anything along the lines of has that founding team or whoever the point person is on that team, have they practiced empathy in their messaging and communication in the last 60 days? Have they looked to add product value in the last 60 days and really address whatever the most acute pains and needs are? So any differences in what you hope to hear on those calls rather than just the sheer number of calls that are taking place?
Yeah, Ross, I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, that's exactly what we want to hear. I mean, in addition to all we love this product, it's the best thing, we could never rip it out, the usual stuff, but also it's that this is a team that cares deeply about their customers, the health of their customers, the success of their customers, and are empathetic towards, as Olivia said, like, our healthcare IT businesses, like, are they going to be, trying to get a big upsell in April at a major hospital system? Like, I hope they're not pressing that too hard right now, right? And focusing on the building a durable and long-term relationship, as opposed to kind of micro optimizing to get that big upsell this year or this quarter or something.
Sure. We had a webinar last week about sales automation, and we got into a lot of different sort of sales strategies that are important for right now. And we had one of the speakers who made the point of a better foundation for this point in time is taking a human-centered approach and making sure that there's empathy and understanding, as opposed to going hard for the upsell because you think that nest egg of revenue around current customers is so important, it needs to be bigger immediately.
Yeah, that's right. And honestly, it's to me, it's demonstrative of the company's values. And again, we get back to, like, is there a consistent culture? Are we hearing and seeing the same things? You can talk about it all you want, but when it comes to money and your customer relationships, are you showing it? Because that really matters.
Of course.
And if you want to be around in 10, 15 years as a company, you have to be treating your customers right when they're going through something tough today.
Important sentiment. Olivia, anything to add?
No, I agree.
That's it. We did have another question come in from the audience, going back to the calls with the different members of the team. Do you like to meet team members individually to form your opinion of each person one-on-one, or do you prefer to meet them as a group and understand the dynamic between them? Preferences there?
We usually do individually, but I don't, I could also see a group, or we typically, in person, we would do more of a group, actually, now that I think about it. So, but for Zoom, we've been doing more individually. I don't have a preference either way. I don't know, Gaurav.
Yeah, you bring up a good distinction. In person, it was almost always in groups, unless for some reason or another you couldn't get someone in the room at the same time. And the nice thing about that is you get to see the dynamic amongst the team. You also get to see how much the management team trusts the rest of their team to share their views in front of investors. And I think it's actually really nice, and it gives us a great glimpse into the team culture and the management team themselves. Over Zoom, sometimes it's a scheduling thing. It's also a lot of boxes talking, and so it's a little bit. It tends to have shifted. I hadn't noticed it before, but Olivia's right. It's shifted a little bit more towards one-on-one, but I think it's also scheduling and a bunch of other reasons. It's not necessarily intentional.
Interesting. Okay, so I think we can move along to the next one or two categories in the poll. in terms of most clicked on, number 3 for us is scheduling a virtual dinner or other get-together to gauge personality fit. So Gaurav, you mentioned this early on, pre-crisis way of doing things, certainly plenty of meals together or drinks or whatever the social avenue might be. Has there been any way over the last 60 days to try to replicate that in any way? And is it just as simple as, yep, we hop on a Zoom call and we hang out and we talk about more of the casual personal stuff as opposed to just business?
Yeah, so that is definitely happening, right? I have virtual lunches with people. I've had virtual dinners, virtual happy hours, like all of that stuff's happening. I will say that like those are wonderful and they don't feel forced at all. They feel really natural and really fun to do. I think what it underpins though is like this need of how do you build trust in a virtual world, and for me, whether that comes through these dinners, virtual dinners, or during meetings, both ways can happen. But a lot of it is just about demonstrating vulnerability, being open and honest, sharing about your personal life and things that are happening. The same things that build trust in person, but just carrying them over to a virtual world. Like if you start a meeting and you just jump right into the pitch deck, you're missing, you're losing an opportunity for both sides to develop a relationship and show vulnerability and be transparent. And so we look for it in almost all interactions, and like Olivia and I were joking earlier, like most VCs are extroverts, right? And so we crave vulnerability and crave discussion. And kind of the last thing we want to do is flip through your slides, and yet we recognize the importance of why this meeting's happening, and we want to get to it too. But using every opportunity you can and every interaction you have to build that trust it just goes a long way.
Yeah, build the trust, build the human component. Olivia, anything to add?
I completely agree. And so instead of thinking about what's the form factor of the interaction, I would focus on how do you create the touch point with the person or the experience that is required to build a relationship. So one example of what relationships are built on is commonalities, right? Do your homework with whoever you're talking to. It's a new candidate or your investor. Oh, we both went to Middlebury. Let's start there, right? And because all of a sudden you can use those commonalities as like a jump start to building that relationship and the foundation of trust. So I would just add that.
Okay, all right. Moving on to our next category, we have offering more personal or professional reference calls. So we covered customer calls specifically, but this is more for someone acting as a personal professional reference for one of the founders of the team. So is this something, and Olivia, we'll start with you, reference calls, were you doing these pre-crisis? Are you doing them now? And then are there any changes either with number of calls or maybe what you hope to hear on those reference calls with different folks?
Yeah, this is definitely the key part. It is a key part of diligence pre-crisis and during crisis. I generally, it does seem like maybe we are doing more reference calls, both on list and off list, during this period, just to make sure that we have more touch points and to help build that picture of the relationship and culture of that team. In terms of what's changed, I think one of the newer questions is that, or one of the questions that has always been important, but now is playing out is, adversity. How do people respond in times of adversity and challenging times, or and walking through some examples of that. We have live examples now. This is a very challenging time for a lot of founders, and I think we're seeing more color now come out on how people are responding to the situation.
We certainly do. And we have these very, very visceral examples of facing adversity fresh in people's minds, so they can probably speak to it pretty clearly and pretty quickly, which is great. Gaurav, anything to add on reference calls?
I would say on the seed stage investments, I think everything Olivia said, I completely agree with. The thing I'd add on, if it's like a Series A or a little bit later, we're spending a little more time talking to former employees as well, and part of it is to get a sense of company culture. Again, trying to wrap our heads around what is going on the inside when we're not able to go visit. These are usually like how you treat people on the way out is kind of really reflective of your organization, and they've been really helpful for us, and sometimes saying yes and sometimes saying no, but a great input into the equation.
Got it. And Olivia, you mentioned on list versus off list. Let's quickly talk about both. So for any founders who are tuned in terms of who you might offer to a prospective investor as a personal or professional reference, what are some of the profiles of folks that are good to kind of like bring to an investor as a reference call? Sounds like employees is one, or former employees. What are
advisors, key advisors to them so that we understand how they interact with that relationship, former colleagues or, former maybe bosses, and then former employees. I would go both ways. And then for off list, we always try to figure out, through our own network of who knows who and can provide just a little bit more color on working with that individual.
Sure. Gaurav, any profiles to add to that list?
Yeah, no, she put it well. I would add, it's more for us. We care a lot. Just did they know you very well? And I think that's where you can get a lot of references. Like it was my lawyer, or it was like, somebody tangentially related to my business, but like, you were paying them, and maybe it wasn't the best kind of the most neutral view of a relationship. And so, I think, as Olivia said, like sometimes talking to their boss is great. So we find those really helpful. And then we also, on the off list, I think one thing we seek out, and we'll often ask founders for this too, but on Olivia's point about adversity, like when you were in a difficult situation, if you were a founder and in your last company, it didn't work out, like what happened, right? And not we don't care about the we couldn't find product market fit and blah, 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 but how did that take a toll on the personal relationships that you had with your co-founders, with your employees, with your board, with your family? Like what came out of that might be instructive to us on what it could be to work together in the future. And sometimes it's just about like knowing how to better work with a person. Like it'll help us work better with you if we understand how things can be when shit hits the fan. And by the way, like we encourage founders to do the same references on us. Like talk to companies that didn't work out, because every venture fund has those, and talk to those founders and ask them, how were we to work with? And I think it's good two-way diligence, and we do it on founders, and we'd expect that they would do that on us as well.
Important considerations. So now we have a few quick strategies here at the end. We kind of tick these off, probably not in so much detail as we did the last 4 or so. But next on the list we have syndicating rounds to include investors that have met the founders in person. I think we took this one from a recent blog post. I don't know if it was Sequoia Capital or another sort of like household name in the VC world, but an interesting strategy here. So you as a prospective investor may not have met the founder in person, but that founder might have met other investors previously before the crisis in person. So further syndicating around and bringing those investors in who know them personally to help build some additional trust. Seems a bit far-fetched as a strategy, but Olivia, Gaurav, I don't know your thoughts on this one.
Olivia, I can try first.
Go ahead.
On balance, it probably would not move the needle.
Yeah.
Is my guess. Like we believe there's a lot of smart investors out there, and many we love working with, and at the same time, like we'll always do our own work anyway, and so and try to come to our own conclusion. So probably wouldn't move the needle too much. I do think the one set of investors that does move the needle a bit on our thinking is your existing investors. And if you have existing investors, like how are they looking at you? How has their sentiment changed? And what's been their experience over the last, X period of months that you guys have been together? Like, we find that insightful, and that was insightful before COVID, and it's insightful after COVID.
Yeah, I agree. What I'll add is that the other group that might be helpful as a syndicate is a complementary skill set fund. So in healthcare, if we're doing a lot of deals with pharma, maybe we as a tech investor would partner with a more biotech pharma experienced investor. And that's interesting to us, but not for the reason that we're the intention of the question, which is around the trust. I do think that it's helpful in adding to the picture of, is this as a reference, right? So another investor could provide that reference, or existing investors. But I completely agree that we would still do our own work. And if it's a company that we really believe in, our strategy is actually to then own as much as possible.
Okay. All right. And that brings us to our final category of the afternoon, which is being open to more rigorous financial or technical due diligence. So Olivia made the point earlier on, of course, of the inability to build trust in person might create a bit of a rising tide when it comes to other parts of the due diligence process. Olivia, for you, and Gaurav, for you as well, do you feel that financial due diligence, technical due diligence has been a bit more robust in the last 60 days as a result of not being able to meet folks in person?
I can start. I don't think it's as a result of not being in person. We used to do diligence here and in these categories, and we still do, and it's still extremely important. What changes is, for example, the uncertainty of the environment impacts a financial plan. So what we will dig into is the scenario planning that you've thought through, and what are your assumptions in that financial plan, for example, and that level of detail is a little bit more in depth.
Yeah. Gaurav, anything to add?
Yeah. Oh, that's exactly what I would have said. The same thing. The uncertainty is we spend more time focused on how do you think through the next, if it's 18 months of capital you're raising or 24 months, like what could happen during that time period, but also like what can go right, because maybe things turn out to, the period of stress we're under turns out to be shorter than we're expecting, and we want to just understand how some of those scenarios would play out. But it's not any more rigorous than it was. It's just oriented slightly differently, because 2 years ago you could have had a 2-year plan and people would mostly say, yep, that makes sense. Today you have a 2-year plan and you're like, I don't know what tomorrow looks like. forget 2 years from now.
Of course. Okay. All right. Well, we've made it through all of the categories of our survey here. We, of course, had 0 clicks for the answer, which was none of the above. The due diligence process will be unchanged in the current climate. So 0 clicks there, which is probably expected. So maybe let's just wrap quickly with high-level final thoughts from the both of you. Your most important piece of advice that you would give to founders now who may be starting raising their next round, either now or in the next 1 to 3 months. Biggest point of advice that you could provide.
I would focus on what are the ways that you build the relationship with whoever it is that you're interacting with it, whether it's you're diligencing a candidate that you want to hire, or you're diligencing investors, or investors are diligencing you. The key is to focus. We also, if we want to invest, we also are trying to sell our partnership to the entrepreneur, and so we have the same questions that we think through is how do we build the strongest relationship and show our value to this relationship. The one thing that we didn't touch on that I just also think is important to think about in this time is some of the silver linings of having diligence or even these meetings over Zoom. And I think we lose a little bit of the unwanted bias one side of the coin is that we, you can't pick up on body language cues. So that's another piece of answer to your question is we have to pay closer attention. Oh, they're squinting. Is it that they don't understand that part of my business? Let me go into that or follow up with an email on that piece, because in the room you can tell they're leaning in or not. But I think on the flip side, the silver lining is that we also lose a lot of the unwanted biases, right? You don't know if I'm sitting in a wheelchair right now, right? Or not. You don't know, the physical appearance also is less distracting. And there's no assigned seating for hierarchy in a Zoom room, right? We're all the same size box, whether I'm the powerful person or not. And so I think thinking about that is as an opportunity for a founder to lean into could also be helpful.
Got it. Gaurav, final thoughts, words of wisdom for founders who might be raising in the near term?
If you say words of wisdom, you're just setting me up for failure. But I would say, I think just due diligence is kind of one part of the fundraising process, right? And the building trust and getting to know people. I think if you step kind of two steps earlier in your fundraising process, I think it's also important to, when times get tough, you can either completely drift from your strategy or you can get even more focused, right? And I think when fundraising is a little bit tougher than it probably has been historically, it's better to be more focused. And so just like I've been watching too much of that Jordan documentary, but just like, you're preparing for a basketball game, like you would really prepare, right? You would know who you're playing against, know who, what are the best lineups against another team. In this case, it's not as adversarial as a game, but you do want to know, you want to have a more refined target list, right? You want to have better quality introductions to the VCs or to the folks that you want to meet. You want to have better insight, especially as you think about building trust, but like into the personalities and how you can best connect with folks, right? Just like you would in a sales meeting or in an account-based selling, right? Like you would go in very well prepared, and VCs, we're spending more time to be better prepared for our meetings with you, and I think it's a great opportunity if you're raising to even narrow your list further, focus on the folks you think could actually do this deal, because it's going to take a little bit longer, it's going to take a little bit more effort on everyone's part, and you can only, your time is kind of your biggest commodity, right? So or scarcest commodity. So.
Absolutely. Prepare, especially now in these times. Olivia, Gaurav, thank you so much. For everyone who is still tuned in, I am just going to share my screen for one moment before we depart and let everyone know a few things that we have coming up for our Venture Lane program. So this is a busy slide. For all those tuned in, feel free to take a quick screenshot. But coming up tomorrow at 12 p.m., we have growth tips and crisis impact stats from 200 plus Boston startups. So Venture Lane, over the last couple of weeks, in partnership with Bostino, Techstars Boston, _VC, and First Republic Bank, we've been running a recession readiness survey for seed and Series A software companies in Boston, capturing sort of economic impact metrics of the last 60 days, and then crowdsourcing strategies and tips from early stage founders in terms of what it's going to take to reverse the curve and get back to growth. So join us at 12 p.m. tomorrow. We'll have Clement Casalot, Sarah Hodges, and Jake Batson on the panel for that one. And then coming up next week on Tuesday, we will have how to cut customer onboarding time in half. We have not created the Zoom for that yet, so no ID there. But you can always find the information by following Venture Lane on LinkedIn, or you see that link below our program and events calendar. You'll find it there once it's created. But for that webinar, we'll have Jess Machino, VP of Account Management at Workable, and Erica Ayati, VP of Customer Success at Privy. So that is what's coming up at Venture Lane next week. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Olivia, Gaurav, thank you so much for making some time today to help founders understand the due diligence process as it currently is in this new climate. Thank you both for tuning in. For everyone who attended, thank you as well. And we hope to see you next week for another one of our webinars.
Thank you.
It's our pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you both.